Good afternoon. My name is Matt Plantier from Innovation Obsessed. I have with me today Adam Coughran. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're from, your experience, and what got you here today?
Yeah, so my current role, I'm the president of SafeKids Inc., home of what we call the HERO program. So from some parents and schools that might recognize that name. I come from a background in law enforcement. I spent 20 years in Southern California working as a police officer and assigned to units, like our active shooter team and counterterrorism and kind of all these things where we are working to protect schools and businesses and organizations. And over that time and teaching active shooter response and all these different things, in about 2015, I got asked a question by a third grade teacher. And so we'd just done all their active shooter stuff and all these different things. This is far before SafeKids or anything else. And I had this third grade teacher ask me, she goes, I really appreciate the training and all these things, but I can't tell my third grade students anything you told me. How can I talk to kids about staying safe and about these, some of these critical conversations? And at the time, I didn't have an answer. I could barely talk to adults without scaring them, no less, kids. And a couple weeks later, I get the same question from a fifth grade teacher. And working more with schools and teaching in schools, both for the agency I was working for at the time and other outside contractors and training corporations, I kept getting asked this question. And a few months go by, I respond to a middle school violence event where it's lunchtime. Kids were not in classrooms where they were practicing, where they had practiced their lockdown drill. They were at lunch. Their teachers, which were all very well trained, they're in the teacher's lounge. And on our active shooter team, first officer there, and the chaos that you saw of all these middle school kids was, as you can imagine. But one of the things that it was very clear to me very quickly is that they had never talked about or practiced or even knew what to do if they weren't inside their classroom where they could lock their door and hide in the dark corner and those types of things. And that voice of that third grade teacher started resonating, like, how do you talk to kids? And that was really kind of the birth of the genesis of the HERO program, was how do we talk to students and teachers and kids on how to stay safe,
right?
And what are the simple things we can do in school, out of school, wherever we happen to be to stay safe. So that way, when we're not in a classroom where we can lock doors and turn off lights, what can we do to try to stop some of this violence, not only prevent it, but also how to respond to it?
Yeah, that's a scary thought, a bunch of kids running around and experiencing that I would imagine that's a pretty traumatic experience for them as well. Do you have any insights into what effect that has on their mental well-being?
Yeah, well, and the conversation today and what we're seeing, especially if you're a parent and you're Googling, my school's active shooter training or do active shooter drills work and all these things, a lot of the conversation around is just that. How traumatizing is even just a drill? Not less even a real event, but practicing, a lockdown drill and practicing these things. And what we've discovered is that over time, if you don't give teachers or kids, or really even parents for that matter, context to what's going on, right? So, if you're drilling only, it's almost like learning by only taking a test. So if I only learn math by taking a math test, there's a pretty high likelihood I'm going to fail a lot of math tests along the way and I'm learning just by failure. That was wrong. I guess we do it this way. And, for probably 20 plus years from about the Columbine era, that 1999, 2000-ish era, until recently, schools have kind of been doing just that. And so you look at traumatizing, these generations of, if it was hyper-realistic, if it was a surprise drill, if there was no context to the drill, they weren't really ever told what to do, even though it's not a real event, and even though it's, everyone was completely safe, the trauma that starts to be instilled from that is very real. And it's very real for a lot of, not only teachers, but for the kids as well. And so a large part of that conversation is around how are we traumatizing kids around some of these topics of violence and all these other things. And then if you throw in there is a real event, right? So something that is, whether it's on campus, in the neighborhood around their campus, I had a quote or a comment, I guess is a better way to put it, from a high school junior. And she had said, we're the generation of active shooters. And she looked point blank at me, and there were some other teachers in the room of kind of, my generation. And she's like, you guys didn't do this. You didn't live through it. You didn't practice it. You never had to do a lockdown drill. We do. And she goes, you were a police officer for many years, and I'm sure you and your family had a fear that you might not come home at the end of the night. I said, well, yeah, that's for a lot of first responders, firefighters, that's a very real fear. She goes, all right, cool. Well, we have that as well going to school, but we have to be here. We have to go to school. We have to do that. She goes, it's the same fear my parents have. And it became very real to me very quickly that, And she said, look, we've never had anything happen on campus. We've had some precautionary lockdowns. The police have been in the neighborhood looking for somebody, and we've had to just stay locked down for that. We haven't had anyone on campus. But she's like, you look at the TV, look at the news. She's like, kids that look like us and schools that look like ours are having these problems. And she's like, it's very real to my generation, on top of all the other stressors and all the other things that are happening, that this trauma and the fear of it is causing some problems, and there hasn't been really good ways to kind of address some of those fears and try to work through it. It's just like, well, it's like a fire drill. You just do the drill and we keep on going. And so the trauma, whether it's induced by drills that are maybe inappropriate or hyper-realistic, or the actual real trauma of being in, around, or near the event, or having family in the same, is very real. And there's a lot of kids today and young adults that are living with some of that prolonged trauma that's going unaddressed because of what's happened.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. I'm sure the idea of going to school every day thinking that, okay, this might be the day where we're either getting a drill or it could be the real thing, definitely would weigh on you. Patrick, do you have anything to add?
Well, it's sad that it's a reality for these kids.
Yeah.
You're doing noble work. We're happy to be here with you today. Thank you for your service.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Police officer. I'm sure, getting to a building like that, even in a drill, is even traumatic for the first responders, some of whom might have kids in those schools, right? So it's definitely a real topic.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm sure there's a lot of paranoia that comes with that as well. How do you balance paranoia and, being prepared? Because obviously they do need to be prepared. It is a real thing that could happen.
Yeah, and so, I think you said it perfectly, right? There's a balancing act here. And, when we see schools that do things in a certain way, or they practice in a certain way, maybe it's a little more realistic, maybe it's surprise, maybe it's, and their heart's in the right spot. Right, they want to try to do something to prepare the kids and their staff, but it's a balancing act between that and maybe going too soft or not enough, and it doesn't really make any difference. Right, we're going to spend 20 or 30 minutes talking about something, but if it's too easy or it's not enough, and that's a conversation amongst many professionals, and it's a balancing act of you don't have to scare people to prepare them. Right, you don't have to, and I equate it to fire drills. Right, we've all been practicing fire drills since we were all tiny and little. But you don't light the school on fire. You don't have a smoke machine that billows smoke in. You don't have a bunch of firefighters showing up and with pulling hoses out and doing things. We kind of know what to do. And there's a balancing act between, talking to kids about scary things and also their teachers, but making it in such a way that it seems attainable. Like it's easy. And what we've discovered is that kids of every grade level, from preschool, younger kids, up even through high schoolers and their teachers, if you have tools towards something, if you kind of understand what's going on and you have some tools to react to something or to address something, that the fear and that anxiety starts to go down. That even though we have a drill, the drill has become something more of like, oh, maybe we get to practice something, or we get to have a little bit of fun, or it's something that we change the way in which you do a drill. So you're not drilling to fail necessarily, you're not drilling to be scared, you're drilling to reinforce, and you're drilling to check for learned concepts and understanding of content that had been given before. So you understand, you learn, and then you practice. And that has kind of, we discovered, has kind of reached the balance of, okay, we have teachers that are prepared, we have kids that are prepared. We shouldn't hopefully ever have to do this, and statistically we probably never will, at least in school. But if you're at a soccer game on the weekend and there's a fight that breaks out, or you're walking home from school and some weird person pulls up in a car, what we discovered is if they have kind of the core skills of understanding how to stay safe, that they apply them in other areas of their life, even outside of those school campuses. And it's, we talk about kind of the preparation for life or life skills. We learn so many things in school, how to stay safe. I grew up in California, right? So we practice earthquake drills, right? So stop, drop, and cover, right? We hold onto a desk, right? We practice escaping for a fire drill. And while those are more, kind of natural disasters, the psychology behind man-made disasters, right? These types of events is a little bit closer to home. It's a little bit of a different neurological context of how people feel about it, but the same principles apply. If you can practice and you get ahead of it and you understand certain things, and all of a sudden it's not really that scary anymore. I know what to do, and we've kind of find that's the fine line balance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Patrick, anything to add? It seems to me that there's some kind of reactive solution that we have going on. Do you have any ideas for a proactive solution?
Well, so one of the questions I'd like to know is COVID. A lot of people were home for a year or two, right? You see more mental health issues after that event. Are you seeing a rise in, people wanting to get education for these kids? Are they proactive in how they're dealing with this? Are you starting to see more schools call and say, how do I prepare these people?
Yeah, COVID was an interesting time for a variety of reasons, but when it came to school safety, schools are really safe when there's no kids there, funny enough, how that works, right? When they're at home, in a way. What we saw during COVID in schools is that you had kids going home so campus safety was pretty safe. But now these kids were being exposed to trauma in the household because you'd have domestic violence issues. You would have, all the kind of the family dynamics now that instead of being with your family for part of the day, you were there all day, every day. And there was a lot of trauma. And a lot of teachers would say that they would report and they'd either see violence in the background, right? Domestic violence or something else like that. Kids were sharing or reporting that there was some trauma, right? Because the frustrations in the house and now the kids are being hit or they're, all these different variety of things. And then when they came back to school, depending on the age group, that was a time in which they understood or were learning coping mechanisms. They were learning facial expressions, right? So you talk to somebody, you'd see the expressions on face, you understood what the emotion was. Well, that was really hard to do on Zoom or on Teams or anything other platform. And what a lot of teachers were reporting is that kids seemed like on top of the educational concerns of, just academically where they fell, socially they were behind in trying to understand things and socially behind in their skills of understanding, of coping, of reasoning, of those type problem solving. When you got into high school, kids that were coming back that were middle school, high school, almost universally, all the schools that we worked with all reported that first year back from COVID, the amount of physical fights were astronomically higher. They had lost the kind of the ability to talk and reason and work through, and it went kind of right to violence pretty quickly. Yeah. That kind of petered out over about a year and a half time frame. It's kind of everyone got reused to being around people again and everything else. But when you look at preventative measures, parts of the HERO program talk about prevention for the older kids, understanding behaviors, recognizing signs. How do you report? Who do you report to? But a lot of it is kind of the response because we know, as in life, we can't prevent everything, right? If it's other students or friends and behaviors we can recognize for sure. But if I'm at the grocery store and the first time I've ever met a person is when they showed up and they brought a weapon or they're upset or it's a former employee or whatever the incident is, that student, there's no way that student could have ever prevented that. They would never seen them, would have seen the prevention of the signs or the behaviors. And so a lot of schools are starting to lean partly on the human part, right? Like the understanding and reporting, but then, also the technologies of how can we help stop these even further away, right? How can we look at social media monitoring? How can we use our cameras? How can we use analytics? How can we do different things as a multi-tiered approach to prevention? Okay, I couldn't agree more. I mean, our program mostly centers on how to respond and stay safe and some of the prevention of behaviors, but it is, it's a multifaceted problem that needs some multifaceted solutions to it to try to prevent it, not only in school, but just I think in life in general. Different places that we visit.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. You mentioned some technologies that you're using. Do you have any other ones that you've seen with, success that are helping?
Yeah, so the challenge with schools is that there's always a funding challenge for any, especially expensive technologies, right? So we can talk about cameras or facial recognition software, license plate readers, any of that stuff. Some schools can not even afford a fence to put around the school to try to even denote where their boundary is, and that we want to, kind of push everybody to the front office to be checked in.
Yeah, new desks.
So that's a challenge. The technologies typically I see that are within reach of a lot of schools is visitor management technology. So, you want to direct somehow, whether you have a fence or shrubs or signs or something, we want to get them to kind of a single point of entry to see, are you supposed to even be on campus, right? Are you supposed to be here? And so, visitor management, things like, they take the ID, take your ID, check it in, or they're running a quick background check. So are they on, are they a sexual predator that's on a list that you're not supposed to be at or near a school? Is there a parental or custody concern? Is this a non-custodial parent now on a day that is not theirs?
Right.
Is this a person that's a restrained party? Maybe it's a teacher who is getting a divorce and there's a restraining order involved, and now that spouse is now showing up at their place of employment.
Right.
And so a lot of prevention now, and those are relatively cheap and attainable technologies that a lot of schools are moving to outside of here, sign this paper, sign our clipboard when you walk in or our binder, right? And then we'll road check. So that, and kids are being kind of conditioned to look for the little ID tag, right? There's a little sticker or a lanyard that has So that way we know that if you are an adult or even a student that you don't recognize, they should have a lanyard. If they don't have a lanyard or a sticker, then you should report to an adult like, hey, there might be a stranger here, they don't have. And so, even who's on campus and the access control, right? So door locks, how do we get doors locked? Are we keeping them locked? Are we, on the West Coast, primarily, especially in California, Hawaii is the same way. Schools are designed to open out to the outside world. The classroom door opens up to the playground or the park or the lawn. There's no, exterior like building where all the classrooms are operating within a building. Many of them are operating right to the outside world. And so the challenge is the layers of security to prevent someone from getting in. You have to jump a fence, go through an office, break through a door. That door frame of that classroom is the only thing preventing someone from getting into that classroom. And so there's some challenges to that we see, technology, some of the higher end technologies slowly coming into schools that are affordable and that they can actually make use of them.
Right. How would you say, with those challenges with budget, what are you looking for that I guess ideally would fit that mold, for a facial recognition vision AI solution?
Yeah, so we've seen it change over the last 10 years. Previously it was only servers on premise, expensive GPUs. You had to keep throwing hardware at the problem. And it would limit your ability with budget to do a small number of cameras. So that wouldn't cover the whole perimeter, interiors. You couldn't look for everybody you wanted to, right? Predators don't come to the front door, right? They don't want themselves to be found, so they find other means, other ways. So what we've done over the past few years is try to move the technology to the edge. And in doing that, we're making use of relatively inexpensive hardware that still has the same processing power. So we can do all of that compute at the edge. So we can push that envelope further out at a very low price. It gives them another layer of protection, prevention, early warning, if you will, so that you can initiate the lockdown when there is a predator or someone that should not be there, or just bring behavioral issues to somebody's attention. Right, if I see fighting and I see it in a cafeteria or even on the exterior of a school, bring that to the attention of security professionals quickly because they don't have enough people, so make the best of the resources they have. And part of what we've done is to push that into the edge to keep the cost down so people can do more.
More of an open-ended question, but you mentioned identifying in the parking lot. What do you think that impact is, I guess, as far as loss of life? Identifying in the parking lot compared to the front door or the bathroom?
Yeah, we have some experience with that. So most of what we do would be in the high school, college, universities. The characteristics that we look for one of our customers is that they have almost a public setting. You think of an open plaza, all over Latin America. You think of train stations. You think of airports. The public has access to it. And you have to find a needle in a haystack among hundreds or thousands of people in real time. When you look at schools, it's typically not the case. It's a smaller number. It's mostly known to the administrator that's sitting behind that book. Yeah. And she knows everybody. And she knows every issue that's going on with that family. And, she does a real good job of discerning who's good, bad, and can be here or not. She goes out on vacation. You typically need something that's more structured, that's going to be able to detect, good actors from bad actors. So we see shootings that are preventable if it's known that Johnny's coming to school today with a gun, right? So one that we helped with was the mom called and said, he's not right. He's got his father's gun. And he's coming to do harm. Well, he doesn't want to be found either, right? So this type of technology can be used to find people out at that perimeter before they get inside where they can do harm. So we're proponents of it. The worst phone call we get is after something happens, where people say, we wish we would have had this ahead of time. We see it a lot in synagogues and churches and, even here in Texas. There's pastors that have experience where, bad actors are able to get to them because they don't have that perimeter of detection.
Well, and, even if you think about from a security point of view, right, you want, the speed of information, the time in which you get it, and distance, right? So typically distance is your friend, right? The more distance you have, the better off you're going to be, because that further distance now gives you more time to react, to move, to whatever the response is going to be. And so, if the first point of contact is the front office secretary when this person walks through the door, that distance is now next to zero, right? The distance is essentially from the office to the first classroom or wherever this person's trying to get to. If we can have that standoff area, in which you hear a lot in kind of the security world, is standoff distance. So if you can put that standoff now into a parking lot, well, now we have some time. Now it might be 30 seconds, it might be a minute, but the person is not literally on top of us. We have some time. We can watch behaviors. We can get doors locked. We can put schools on lockdown. If they're out at recess, we can get kids in, outside of, their playground or recess, wherever they're at. The further out we can get it, we've seen some schools install, license plate reader technology, and kind of the same degree. If they know, any license plate that isn't registered with the school, that is otherwise a parent flags as this is someone we don't know. If there's issues with parents, they have, restraining orders and custody orders, they have both plates. They can flag one plate on a day that car shouldn't be there. All of a sudden, hey, mom or dad or whomever is now here on a day that they shouldn't. Right. That might mean nothing, right? It might, maybe they made it, someone couldn't pick somebody up for some reason, or it could be something much more serious that, and so I want real-time information as fast as I can get it, the furthest away I can get it, to give me time to react to what's going on. And so when you think about the investments of technology, how can we do that so we can push this barrier, the standoff distance, as far away as we can to give us the most amount of time to react?
Yep. Yeah, we were talking about the bank in Tennessee earlier. The ability to make it actionable is what a lot of places lack. Not just schools, a lot of corporations, banks. The ability for HR to say this person was let go, they have an axe to grind, their exit interview didn't go well. That's information that a security professional, that's context, that could save lives, right? So they show up in a parking garage, they're bringing a bag out that's not in the shape of a laptop. They don't have a laptop to return. That 4-minute difference from parking garage to door could save lives.
Well, and that played out in Las Vegas. We were talking about Las Vegas earlier, a couple of years ago. Major strip hotel, same thing. They had an employee that was essentially, I believe, administrative leave or was under HR investigation. Had kind of no call, no show. So there were some concerns with this. The parking lot had license plate readers. It had all the technology. This employee shows up, used their card to get into the parking lot. So it immediately flagged the car that, hey, there's, this person has now finally shown up. Immediately, security responds. They follow him on the cameras to the parking lot. Individual stops. He's just sitting in his car. Security walks up to the car to make contact, and then essentially a gun battle ensues in the parking lot.
Wow.
And so, what was widely believed is that security officer stopped what could have been either maybe targeted violence in the workplace, right, going back to HR or their manager or whatever, or worse, now you have, an active shooter event inside of a large casino with lots of people, but that person was contacted in a confined area only with 2 people. And it sequestered essentially that violence to an area and saved, who knows how many lives. But we see so many instances of that to where it's an early warning system. We can kind of start to contain this and try to solve it long before, the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. Let's try to do something.
Do you see schools going with longer range cameras to give them that distance?
It to some degree, it depends on the school. And I would tell you, so some schools, especially in an urban setting or a city setting, don't really have that capability either because of the structures around them. Some states also kind of mandate what you can and can't capture. So if your camera is pointing off your property and maybe next door, it's looking to a backyard, there's some privacy concerns on certain cameras. But then, in some more rural areas that are a little bit more open, now it's, I kind of want to see what's going on in the completely open field next door to the school, because if someone's driving through or coming through that open field, sure, that's going to be a concern. So it somewhat depends on the setting, somewhat depends on what they're looking for, what the concerns are, or if they have a known threat. So now maybe they've received a threat. They might have kind of the pole cameras on a trailer for a couple of weeks. They might maybe hire some extra security to look at one of our schools. Behind them is like a drainage canal, for lack of better terms, right? So a pretty urban school. They've had a lot of crime in this back area. There's been a lot of issues, and some of which mostly overnight, but starting to overflow into the school. So they put a couple cameras back there. They put up lights. points. They have a security guard now to try to change the environment to monitor what was essentially just an abandoned drainage canal for years that now has come to life with some criminal activity. So sometimes it'll be, temporary as kind of the criminals move along, but some of it they put in the infrastructure to prevent it from ever coming back again.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up the bank and you brought up the casinos. What do you think schools can learn from other industries and what they're doing?
The thing with schools is, there's always a fine balance, and you have a lot of stakeholders in a school. In a traditional business, a casino, a bank, anything else, essentially you have the business or the corporation that is running it, and then your clientele, your guests, your consumers that come in. Those are, as long as the guests are happy and they keep coming back, whether it's a hotel or anything else, then we're doing a pretty good job. Schools, you have some layers to this, right? So you obviously have the schools, you have the people that work there, so the teachers, you have the students that attend the school, you have the parents of the students that are there, you have a school board that is usually, whether it's public or private, so you have the community around the school. There's so many layers to this, and to try to get alignment on everything is sometimes really easy and sometimes not so much. And so, drawing from other industries, one of the main things I see in schools, and it really comes from, hospitality primarily, is how do we make a place safe without it making feel unsafe? I hear a lot, fences, makes it look like a prison. It makes it look like an institution. Like I want our schools to be friendly and inviting. I don't want big, tall fences and razor wire everywhere and metal detectors and all these other things. And then if you look at a hotel, you walk in, it feels like it feels safe, but you didn't pass any security. You didn't get searched, you didn't go through a metal detector, you didn't. And so finding the ways in which hospitality really works and how they keep hotels safe, that's open to the world, as you mentioned. How do we bring some of that technology into schools and say, how can we increase our security stance? How can we do things? And almost no one knows the difference. It doesn't feel like it's impeding my ability to show up to school and have my kids learn. And some of it is really dependent upon where you are in the country too. Some schools are completely wide open and that's a good feel. Other places, that doesn't even feel safe. I'm not going to put my kid in a school that doesn't have a fence, doesn't have a security guard, doesn't have metal detectors, right? So sometimes there's a perception of security. But I think, using some of those measures that are not always necessarily in your face, so to speak, is a good middle ground for a lot of schools. So the kids feel safe, the parents feel safe. We know there's technologies in place that are helping us keep safe. We might not see it, but we know that those things are there to try to help prevent it.
Yeah, I would almost feel that a lot of those would disrupt the educational experience a little bit. If I'm seeing metal detectors everywhere, and it would just kind of remind me, I'm not in a school, I'm in a war zone type of feeling. So are there any other solutions that you would recommend, Patrick, or that you're seeing?
Well, a lot of times the discussion is it preventable, right? So we're seeing a lot of our customers and universities going with mental health professionals for profiling, right? Just to say, you mentioned, did they not show up for work for 3 days? Well, has Johnny not been to class for 3 days, right? Those types of things. So I think people are trying all these different things to try to prevent as much as possible. It's not just technology. I think it's in all of the above.
Yeah, I always say the technology is a tool, right? It's a tool for the people to try to make a decision on. And the more tools we have and the more information we have, the better. But we're not going to technology our way out of some of this, right? It's going to be a tool. It's going to help us resonate and have a greater kind of an ROI, so to speak, on certain things. But we talk about it's multifaceted. And I go back and you look at, if you look at a case study for school fires, the last kind of major school fire where kids were hurt and killed and those types of things was in the 50s, 1958, right? We've gone 70, 80 some odd years, but it wasn't that we put a firefighter in every classroom. It wasn't that we did all this technology, right?
Yeah.
What we did is we did a bunch of things, right? We have drills and we have some technology and we have some training and we do, it's a multifaceted component. And this is no different in that, mental health is a huge component of this. But there's software that can help monitor it, track it. What are we doing? We're looking at the behaviors. But it still takes a person to talk to the person, to work through the resources, to get them out of crisis, whatever that may be. All along the way, people are the common denominator of it. And so what are we using to help augment the people to keep, kids in our businesses safe?
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, I think we've learned a lot. Thank you so much for the work you're doing in the schools and, especially with the paranoia, the mental health that they have to deal with, and helping to ease that. I think that's huge. Patrick, anything to add?
No, just again, thanks for your service, and you guys are doing great work, and thanks for sharing some of those best practices with this audience.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And like I said, thanks for building the tools and, you know, some of those things that help the practitioners do their job at the end of the day. Because the better tools we have, the better the practitioners can do it, and the more people we get to keep safe.